Today I'm going to be giving my honest review of Deep Rock Galactic Rogue Core. This is a 1 to 4 player co-op roguelike action game that features many of the same things fans loved about the first game. You've still got your dwarves diving deep into alien planets and dangerous mines to complete objectives, but this time the goal is different. Join the Reclaimers and fight through hostile facilities to reclaim them from the deadly core spawn. Okay, let's talk about this game. Because honestly, my expectations going in were pretty high, especially after clocking over 100 hours in its predecessor, Deep Rock Galactic. I imagine a lot of people are jumping into this thinking that Rogue Core is going to be the same, but I promise it isn't just a copy. Deep Rock Galactic Rogue Core is what is called a roguelite. For my viewers who don't know that term, a roguelite is a genre built around runs. This means you go on missions, and when you die or finish a run, most of your gears and items reset. However, you keep certain upgrades or long-term progression that helps make future runs easier and more enjoyable. Now you might be worried hearing that, like weapons don't carry over or get permanently upgraded in the way you'd expect, but even without the traditional progression system, the game is still really enjoyable and manages to stay fun run after run. Rogue Core honestly exceeded my expectations. There are a few hiccups I'll talk about later, but overall, let's dive into why I think it's a really awesome game. First off, it's still very much a DRG game. If you love the way DRG looks, runs, or just functions, you're going to recognize a lot of that here. The dwarves, while different in some ways, still keep the same iconic style, and they also retain a lot of the original voice actors, which I genuinely love. DRG is one of my favorite games, so seeing so many familiar visual styles, environments, and character design choices carried over really adds to the experience for me. I know some people might look at it and say, oh, it's just a copy of DRG, that sucks, but I actually think that makes sense for a lot. These are already proven designs and systems that look and feel great. Plus, they're already pushing out updates shortly after release, so there's clearly a lot of room for new maps, cosmetics, and visual variety to come later on. Next, I really love that the maps still feel like DRG, but with a different vibe layered on top. In Rogue Core, you're going in as a reclaimer, recovering facilities and areas that the dwarves from the original game have lost. And honestly, that concept alone is so cool to me. You can really see the effort put into making these places feel abandoned and lived in at the same time. We're talking old mine shafts, broken down sitting, resting areas, and environmental details that strongly suggest dwarves were actually here before everything fell apart. One of my favorite touches is the mini mules, scattered around the maps that you can try to repair. Seeing them left behind, partially broken, really adds to that feeling of a long abandoned operation. It's a small detail, but it does a lot to sell the atmosphere. Another thing I really like is the mining system. It's a bit more simplified. In DRG, you're constantly juggling multiple different ores as you explore each map, but in Rogue Core, it's streamlined down to just one main source, Exponite. I actually think this works really well for this game since the whole structure is built around runs and moving quickly through elevators deeper into the facility. It makes sense to not slow things down with a bunch of different mining priorities. The core loop here isn't about hoarding resources, it's about getting in, completing the objective, and getting out. And that simpler mining system supports that pacing really well. I also really like the characters. I haven't tried all of them yet, but the ones I have played, like the Guardian or the Falconer, have been really cool so far. Each has unique abilities just like in DRG. I also think it's awesome that there are now female dwarf characters in the game. In some lore, female dwarves are even said to have longer beards than the men, which is a really fun detail. So it's cool to see that in game you can still equip the beards on female characters or lean into a more traditionally feminine style if that's the route you want to take. Overall, I think it's a really cool and flexible addition to the game. My last favorite thing I want to talk about, other than the core gameplay itself, is how you unlock the different beers. Again, these beers are the same idea as in DRG, but the way you unlock them in Rogue Core is completely different. Instead of finding materials during runs, you now unlock them through a new exercise area. Basically, the robot at the bar has you do workouts to burn calories in order to earn your beers. And honestly, I think that's kind of hilarious and a really clever way to keep the beer system in the game. Since you don't really keep items from runs anymore, aside from a few upgrades, this gives the beers a consistent place and progression without relying on loot drop. It's a small change, but it fits the game's tone really well. Now, let's talk about some issues I experienced while playing the game. The first thing that was somewhat frustrating was the difficulty balance. I played in multiplayer, and we felt that some runs were extremely smooth while others were very punishing with very little middle ground. Now, part of that definitely comes down to RNG. We didn't always roll good weapons, which made surviving much harder at times. But even beyond that, it felt like enemy spawn rates and overall encounter pacing weren't always as tuned as well as we were hoping. The biggest example of this was the final boss on the last level. It took us about 4 hours just to beat it the first time. Even with fairly decent gear, we just kept wiping out. But once we finally did defeat it, every attempt after that felt almost like a breeze in comparison. Don't get me wrong, we actually enjoyed the boss fight. It was unique and fun, but the difficulty curve around it felt a little bit inconsistent. I really hope that gets tuned in the future updates. For a day one experience though, it was still pretty great overall. My biggest gripe with this game is that it kind of punishes you for being a thorough player. In DRG, we would sometimes stay on a mission for a long time, exploring every nook and cranny to make sure we got everything. In Rogue Core though, that playstyle feels discouraged. There's a timer on the top left of the screen, and once it fills up, the Reaper Worm spawns because you've been in the level for too long. I do understand the intent here. The game is meant to be faster paced, especially when it comes to decision making and choosing upgrades on the fly. But in practice, the Reaper Worm just feels really punishing and honestly kind of annoying at times. It also feels a bit unfair when it shows up during a boss fight. If you get bad weapon rolls and the boss fight takes longer than expected, you can end up getting pressured by the Reaper Worm at the same time. There were a couple runs where we are extremely close to finishing the boss, only to get taken by the worm at the last second. Technically, you can fight it off if a teammate starts attacking it before it drags you into its wormhole, but it happens so quickly in the heat of the moment that most of the time you're just forced to accept your fate and wait and wipe the run. Another thing I'm slightly iffy on is the upgrade system. You use Expedite to gain upgrades, which I think is actually a pretty cool idea. The issue is that you share those upgrades with your teammates. In a coordinated group of friends who are communicating well, it's honestly not too bad. It's a bit annoying at times. But I can only imagine how it feels in a random matchmaking where players just grab the strongest upgrades for themselves every time without thinking about their teammates. There is some structure to help with that. The upgrade selection rotates who picks first, and you can also mark items you really want with the heart icon, which does help reduce the greedy player problem a little bit. But even with those systems in place, it can still feel a little bit frustrating depending on the team you're with. On top of that, there's also a timer when choosing upgrades. I know that might annoy some players, especially people like me who read a little bit slower when there's pressure. At the same time, I do understand why it's there. The game is a roguelite, and it's meant to push quick decision making and fast pacing. I'm sure you'll hear this in a lot of reviews, but the ammo economy in this game is just awful. You're heavily dependent on the map having resupply stations, and if you're only playing with 2 players, you only get access to 2 resupplies from the pods. Not being able to call down a resupply pod like you would in DRG is honestly pretty frustrating. I do understand the lore reasoning. Since you're reclaiming abandoned facilities, these are just leftover supply pods scattered throughout the area. But in practice, there just aren't enough of them. We ended up running out of ammo pretty frequently on certain runs, which forced us to rely on pickaxes or special abilities just to get through waves. That made things noticeably more difficult in a way that didn't always feel intentional or fun. Personally, I'd love to see some kind of alternative tied to Expedite upgrades. Maybe an option to unlock a resupply pod instead of a standard upgrade choice. I know it would be costly to skip an upgrade, but there were definitely moments where I would have preferred the extra ammo instead. Another option could be even bringing back a system similar to Nitro, where you can earn resupplies during runs, just at a higher cost or with stricter requirements than in DRG. One other thing that I found to be very annoying was on the ice maps, the terrain is very steep. It's impossible to traverse that terrain without some kind of terrain tool, and sometimes those just weren't an option in the roles, which made things even more difficult. And by the time we were able to finally get to the areas we needed to be, that Reaper Worm that I spoke of earlier was just kind of already there to rush us through even more, which really added an extra layer of stress that I don't think was intentional for the game, and I do hope that they change that map in the future, or at least give us more terrain tools to help with that issue. Lastly, something that's more of a minor issue than a major complaint is that there were a few bugs I ran into while playing. In some cases, when I was using certain characters, my special abilities would bug out and never disappear, even though they're supposed to only last a few seconds. That said, this seems really like a first day launch issue, because after they pushed an update on day 2 of release, I wasn't able to recreate those bugs anymore. I really appreciate how quickly developers address those problems. It's clearly genuinely care about this game. One of the bugs that are kind of funny though is that the drunk effect never wore off. We ended up doing an entire run while constantly drunk and disorientated, which made things like hacking sequences way harder than they were supposed to be. But honestly, it was pretty hilarious, so I can't complain about it much. Overall, I think this game has a lot of awesome potential. Does it completely scratch that Deep Rock Galactic itch? Not entirely. But I think that's mostly because it functions as a roguelite. And personally, I tend to prefer progression systems where you can upgrade, unlock, and keep weapons and tools across missions. As of writing this review, I have put about 13 hours into Deep Rock Galactic Rogue Core, and I can honestly say I do really like it. There's a lot of replayability here, especially if you enjoy randomness and weapons upgrades and a build variety each run. If you're someone who prefers persistent progression and using the same loadouts across missions, then you'll probably still get more out of Deep Rock Galactic. But if you enjoy adapting each run with different weapons and making quick decisions based on what you're given, then I think this game is a great fit for you. I also really hope that in the future updates they add more quirky, funny achievements like they have in Deep Rock Galactic. Those always add so much personality and charm to the game. Let me know what y'all think. Can you see yourself getting this game? Is this a game you see yourself playing a lot? Drop a comment down below with anything I might have missed or anything you'd like to see me cover next. Rock and stone, miners!